This podcast was produced by OAR FM Dunedin with support from New Zealand On Air.
And welcome to the OI podcast, the Otago Institute podcast, in-depth conversations with experts from the worlds of arts, sciences and mataranga Māori, brought to you by the Otago Institute, the Otago branch of the Royal Society for Arts and Sciences. I'm Dr. Barb, and today in the studio we have Dr. Michael. Now, is it pronounced Michael or Michelle?
Both works.
Both works,
Yep.
And your last name is pronounced Knapp or just
Knapp. Yes,
Knapp.
it is.
It's got that K at the start of it, but it's really just, it's an interesting little blend there, isn't it? And today we're talking all about, I should tell the viewers, today we're talking all about kākā. Fantastic. And they are obviously many people's favourite bird. They're definitely one of my favourite birds out there. And I'm assuming one of your favourite birds there as well, because you've spent quite some time now researching them.
I do like them. I do like a lot of different birds, and some of them are extinct, but the kākā are definitely among them.
Yeah, but not all extinct, right? So there are some that are extinct and some that are not. And I think that's probably a bit where a lot of people don't realise that there were more species of kākā out there, and some of them are extinct, but we will get on to that a little bit later. We'll talk about the subspecies, we'll talk about some of their closer relatives, some of the extinct ones, some of the struggling ones, and some of the maybe not, maybe kind of getting their feet back on the scale of everything there. But I thought just at the start here, we would just delve in a little bit into yourself. And I know you have been on the show before, and thank you for coming back on. That was ages ago now.
It was, yes.
We've been here for a while and talking about something completely different. Today we are talking about the kākā and their close relatives, but I just thought maybe if you just remind the listeners out there where you come from and your background and how you came to be a fantastic scientist right here at in Dunedin at Otago University.
Thanks, Barbara. Well, fantastic scientist, I'm not sure what, but I started out, I grew up in the Saarland in Germany. I studied biogeography at the University of the Saarland, like a good Saarlander, back at home. Then I moved to New Zealand for the first time. I did my PhD at Massey University in plant biology. I moved back to Germany to do some work at the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology there. And then moved to Dunedin for the first time to take up a postdoc, and later took up a lectureship in our associate professor role at the University of Otago. I'm interested in plants and animals, ecology in general. Mostly I'm using genetic tools, but that's really just the tools to address the questions. It's the ecology and the conservation that I'm really interested in. Yeah,
and you've gone away and then come back, drawn back to Dunedin multiple times there.
Yes.
So it's obviously it's your place in the heart there, I think, Dunedin.
I've now moved to New Zealand 3 times and to Dunedin twice. So yes, I think it is.
Yeah, let's hope this time sticks, eh? Now, just a point of reference there. You said you're from the Saarland. Where is the Saarland?
The Saarland is the smallest Bundesland of Germany, if we ignore the city-states. It's right on the French border. It's about 150 or so kilometers north of Strasbourg in the Alsace region. And
so the Alsace region is where they have the nice white wine, is that right?
Yes, I think that's correct, yeah.
And it's the sort of the bit on the edge of France where they had, hundreds of years ago, or over hundreds of years, they had kind of swapping between France and Germany as to who kind of was the big shot.
Yeah, the Saarland was one of those places that swapped around. In fact, my mum was born exactly where she's living now, but she was born in France and now she's in Germany, so it is
so arguably you could be considered French, half French.
Yeah. I don't think anyone would consider me French, especially not those people who have heard me speak French.
Right, okay, cool. We'll move on there. So what brought you to kākā?
Well, it is a very interesting species from a conservation perspective. I was looking at a number of bird species, and I was talking to a colleague of mine, Professor Schofield from the Canterbury Museum, and he pointed out this conundrum, this conservation conundrum that we see in kākā, in that they seem to be clearly distinct subspecies in the North Island and the South Island.
Right.
They're treated like that. But when you look at them genetically, they're not. They're not at all.
That's interesting. So let's just clarify this a little bit. So in New Zealand, currently, we think of there as being two subspecies of kākā. The North Island species, which is recovering in its conservation status.
Yes, I think so, yeah.
It's kind of there. And the South Island subspecies, which is still nationally vulnerable.
Correct.
And then there was also the Norfolk Island kākā, and the Chatham Islands kākā. And that, them being on smaller offshore islands, that's sort of, to a person like me who's just kind of on the broader spectrum of the edges of this science, I would think, okay, that seems like that's likely a speciation event where they've, a small founding effect there and then they've speciated there. Both the Norfolk Island and the Chatham Island kākā are now extinct. Do we know when they went extinct?
I'm sure we do, but I'm not sure about it at the moment.
But presumably a long time ago. Not in the last 100 years, not in the last 200 years?
Not in the last 100 years, but it would have been after people arrived there.
Right.
I'm just trying to think whether it was the first people arriving or whether it was Europeans arriving that wiped them out. And I should know this, and I have known this, but right now...
But I'm asking you all the tricky questions right off the cuff.
Yes.
Sorry about that. Now, their nearest relatives are obviously the New Zealand kea.
That's correct, yes.
And then I guess after that, the kakapo.
Yes, although that's already quite a distant relative. But
right.
Yes, that is.
So it's actually quite a small group, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, and, based in New Zealand, so very much an endemic group. And that whole genus now just exists in New Zealand, is that right? Yeah, and then because the kakapo and the kea are already in a different genus, is that right? Yeah.
They are in different genus, yes.
Yep.
Oh, hold on, no, so the kakapo is, the kea isn't.
The kea isn't, right. Yes, sorry. Get myself sorted out there. Yeah.
But yeah, so it's a group. The kea and the kākā are relatively closely related. They diverged about 2 million years ago or so from a common ancestor.
Right. I mean, that's quite a long time, isn't it? 2 million years.
In evolutionary terms, it's basically yesterday. But
right.
Of course, to us, it seems like a long time. But this happened at the beginning of the Ice Ages. It was probably a result of Ice Age environmental change. That
right.
So
what was happening in the environment of New Zealand at that point?
Well, what we see is essentially you have dense forestation in New Zealand for the best part of 10 million years or something like that. Right.
So that's really stable for a long
Very stable.
time.
So you have a lot of forest-adapted bird species, and the ancestor of kea and kākā is one of them.
Right.
That was almost certainly a forest bird. And then the Ice Ages come and a lot of the forest disappears.
Right, because it gets colder.
It gets colder.
And a bit drier?
Drier in some places. The South Island, some areas of the South Island in particular would have lost quite a bit of forest.
Right, those sort of Canterbury Plains, inland basins there, East Coast kind of
forest
areas.
would have persisted more on the North Island. And the result of that, as you can imagine, is you have all these kākā populations, or kākā
proto-kākā.
Yeah, proto-kākā and kea. They exist in forests. Suddenly the forest goes back and back and back, so you have pressure on those populations.
But also you have this new habitat that's expanding, right?
Exactly.
So you've got this big kind of, they say nature abhors a vacuum, and that's what new habitat is, in effect.
Exactly.
It's something that's not being fully utilised. So then you get a few individuals that kind of go, hey, I like that.
Yeah,
space.
Kaka and kea are very inquisitive birds, right? So you can easily
and very
imagine,
smart. Like they're in that parrot family.
Yes.
And like if anyone's come across, keas, figuring out how to get into a tent or a hut or a car or anything, absolutely unbelievably intelligent.
Yeah, so
more intelligent than a lot of people, I would say. But that's my own personal opinion there, folks. Don't take it personally. Don't come at me.
Yeah, in any case, that would have resulted in the kea, the ancestors of the kea, essentially some proto-kākā moving out into these new environments, figuring out how to utilize food sources there.
Right.
Eventually, they wouldn't have ventured back into the forest too often anymore. You have slow separation of these populations, and eventually...
And the ones that are out on the kind of non-forested areas are breeding more likely with the ones that are on the non-forested areas, and then they sort of slowly drift into that with the ones that are kind of mixed, maybe being less fit for either environment, and kind of them separating.
Yeah, we can speculate on that, but the end result is essentially you have a kia, which is the open habitat species, and you have the kaka.
We tend to think of kia as alpine birds because we see them around ski fields, we see them when we're tramping way up in the mountains. Is that true, or is that just a kind of a result of the more pressure from other things, humans, landscape changes on the...
We were very interested in that as well, and a PhD student of mine, Dr. Denise Martini, did a lot of work in this space for her PhD. And specifically, she looked at genomic adaptations in kia and kaka for alpine habitat and non-alpine habitat. And the kia has a couple of adaptations that are known as alpine adaptations, but so does the kaka.
Right.
So this comes from their ancestor.
It doesn't come from that speciation post-separation.
No.
It's interesting.
So we think the alpine, where they have the opportunity, kia come all the way down to sea level.
Yeah.
And so we don't think they're an alpine species as such. In fact, we've speculated before that it could easily be the fact that they had a bounty on them for 100 years, that they retreat to places
that are harder to
people,
get.
right?
Yeah, right.
And that makes them alpine because there's less people there.
Yeah. And are they much affected by predators, like introduced predators like rats, stoats, cats?
Yeah, they unfortunately are. Both the species, kaka and kia, are.
Because they're quite, they fly quite well. They're not one of our flightless birds. Yeah. So they are quite, and they're reasonable size. They've got a big beak and, quite strong sort of parrot claws, talons.
They can certainly defend themselves, but it's the breeding season where they're really particularly susceptible. So if you think of kaka breeding in sort of hollowed out trees, you get a stoat in there. The kaka that's sitting on the nest has got very little chance of survival.
Right, because there's no space to kick.
Yeah, essentially.
Yeah. And I guess the females are sort of sitting there incubating the eggs and looking after the chicks. How does that work? Is it the female just sits on the nest and the male goes and gets food and brings it back, or do they share or swap? Sorry, I'm asking an evolutionary
a gene jockey about the biology of.
Yes, no, sorry, I'll stop myself right there. We'll look that up somewhere else.
I have a fairly good idea, but I'm always worried about if I make statements about that someone will yell at the radio.
Okay, well, I think I don't know. If people yell at it, come at me, but I'm pretty sure that there's more mortality of the females, and I think that's because of the nest sitting.
The nesting situation that is affecting them.
And of course that's a bigger blow to the population as well, because, and I will get yelled at here, but, populations in the sense of a reproducing population, especially one that is vulnerable or endangered, it really does come down to the females. Yeah. It's the number of females that are there, and, once you've gone past one male, you're pretty much into surplus territory. That's, of course, a very outrageous statement, and I'm sure I will get people saying, oh my gosh, she's so sexist. It's kaka, people. We can be a little bit just, biological about some of these things. It's all about genes, and you get half the genes from your
mum and half your genes from your dad. Yes.
And a little bit of diversity is great, but at the end of the day, when you get to those crunch points, it's all about numbers. And yeah, it is and so the predators are one of the key factors that affect the birds. And you can also see that as soon as you have predator control for kaka, for example, they start expanding their population and of course
size.
That's what we've seen in Wellington, and now starting to see also here in Dunedin at Orokonui Ecosanctuary, finally. So there's been a bit of a struggle there for them to get, but Wellington just absolutely, and that was of course from Zealandia, so reintroduced there and then just absolutely have expanded. And Wellington folk all around in the suburb have done a fantastic job. So it's a really great community effort there to really push down those predators all around the Wellington area there. And of course they have seen this explosion of kaka.
Yeah. And that's fantastic. And there's a hope that maybe you will see that here in the I
hope so. And I just think this year, finally, we've seen, we've had sightings out at Aotearoa, we've had sightings along West Harbour, we've had, a few farflings. And of course they can fly great distances. I mean, the kia are well known for popping from one ski field to the other. And I think, unfortunately for the kia, I think that what maybe happens is that people, when you see them, you tend to see a few together. like possibly juvenile males hanging out in kind of a little bad boy group doing bad boy stuff. But it gives people, I think, a false impression. It certainly gave me a false impression before I actually really looked at the numbers, that they're doing much better than they are because, of course, the care are not doing great.
No, there's still limitations, but it is really encouraging to see that essentially predator control makes such a huge difference, and they have the capacity to regenerate, to expand again.
Because predator control is something we can affect as people. We can, knock back those predators and make large areas really, depress that predator population to the point where enough offspring are surviving to juveniles and adults that they are actually able to reproduce themselves. Yeah, and of course places like Orokonui Ecosanctuary are phenomenal in that regard because they've got those fenced areas where you've got that core population that's able, year on year, is able to reproduce. And then I think at the moment they've sort of got to a carrying capacity for Orokonui, so they've got juveniles coming out looking for suitable places. I think their population there, just, I think of Orokonui as huge because it's, this sort of little catchment there, but actually in terms of landscape scale it's actually a very small area. But I think they've got about 60 birds now.
Yeah, I don't know the numbers, but it seems like certainly the fact that the juveniles are now flying out and starting to explore new habitats suggests that they've reached that point now. And that's just really good news.
Yeah, and I talked to Elton, the conservation manager there at Orokonui, some time back. But folks, do go back to that interview. It's probably the year before last now, but it was a fantastic interview. And of course, Elton knows all about the program that they're managing there at Orokonui, and they've been doing some sort of live, getting numbers and getting people to hand in like sightings. And probably the best way now is probably just to add that into the iNaturalist site, I think, and just put your thing there, put your sighting there. It's quite easy to tell if it's a kākā. Have you got insight into that you'd like to share with the listeners there, Michael?
Well, generally, if you're in Dunedin and you see a reasonably big parrot, that'll be a kākā. We don't have kia here, and we certainly don't have kākā here unless Shiroko comes to visit.
Yeah.
So. And in that case, it wouldn't be flying if it was a kākā. So there's a fairly good,
and I guess if it's flying and it's up, you might maybe mistake a karerea or a kahu, a hawk or a falcon there for because they're kind of large birds for a kākā. And I think they have a whiter underside, and of course, if you get. And they sort of have a beak as well. Obviously not seabirds.
The birds of prey generally have sort of more longer, wider wings, or if you're looking at a falcon, sort of more aerodynamic wings, if you like.
For that dive.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
While the kākā is more, it doesn't have that distinct bird of prey silhouette.
Yeah.
Which is hard to describe when I think of it.
But they kind of look more like a parrot, I guess, is the answer. Yeah. And I guess we have the eastern rosellas, which of course are introduced from Australia, but they are much, much smaller.
They're much smaller, and their plumage sticks out normally. They're very colourful plumage.
Very colour, green and red and yellow.
If you see green shine through and all sorts of other fancy colours, then it's usually not a kākā. But
although, having said that, the kākā have amazing coloured plumage with that kind of orangey underwing and very beautiful.
Similar to the kia, where you wouldn't expect it when you see them with their wings folded in. But as soon as they spread their wings, you can see the red underneath.
Yeah. And what I love about the kākā, I'm just going back to Orokonui again, is that with the feeding station there, it's just you can absolutely go and see kākā. And, sometimes folk here in Dunedin, we take that for granted that we can just go to Orokonui and see the kākā. But actually, prior to 2008 when they were reintroduced here, that was just like an amazing thing that you're way outside of, anywhere distant from town. But they're there, they're always there. There's a couple of juveniles always kind of hanging around and bossing the tui and the bellbirds around off the feeder. So, and I do think that Orokonui now have got a webcam up, which is pretty cool. So you can actually see them there without, if it's a rubbish day and you just don't want to go. But anyway, fantastic to see the kākā. Right, The other thing is leg bands. Do you know about leg bands?
No, I'm terrible with that sort of ecological side of things.
Wow.
So I obviously there is, when you see them, you can report the leg bands back, but I don't know more about that than
I think they band them with different colours on different legs and different sequences, and I think the rule is left side as though you're the bird, top to bottom, right side top to bottom, and probably it's worth just noting that down if you're gonna say it. And of course they love pictures. iNaturalist, all conservation agencies love pictures because then there's no debating what it was and where you saw it. So that's all good information for them. Oh, right, tell us about this study.
Right.
How do you do this genetic sort of study?
Well, so I'll start it with the question, which was the one that we mentioned to start with, and that is that you seem to have North Island and South Island different subspecies.
Right, yeah.
They look very different. They have different plumage color. They even have different sizes. You can distinguish them quite easily. But a gene jockey like me comes and looks just at the genetics, and there isn't a clear difference. You certainly don't see a Cook's trait in the populations there. There's a bit of isolation by distance, which basically means that a northern South Island bird, say from the Nelson region, would look more similar genetically to a Wellington bird than it would to a southern South Island bird.
Right. So it's sort of a gradient. The ones at both ends look more different from each other. But as you get closer together, they just sort of, they're obviously interbreeding there, I guess, is the answer.
But, of course, that's not what we see in nature.
Right.
Where there is a very clear distinction between a South Island bird, no matter where that South Island bird is from, and a North Island bird, no matter where that North Island bird is from.
So does that mean that genetics isn't all the answer? How does that work?
Yeah, so that's what we're trying to figure out. Why? How this is working? Because it's highly relevant for conservation. So, to understand where the limitations are, I can just go into the genetics a little bit. So basically, if you think of the genome of a bird, right? That's basically the manual on how to make that bird.
So that's just all the DNA, all the
DNA,
A, C, G, T's, all lined up, everything lined up.
It's the cookbook. It's how to make that bird.
Right.
And there's 1 billion letters are written in that book.
Right.
And basically, so that's, I ChatGPT this morning, that would be a book of about 300,000 pages.
Right. And 300,000 pages is a lot, right? Regardless of what font you put it in.
And how much of that book you can read depends on the technology that you have available. So the first studies 10 years ago or so, they were only able to look at a couple of paragraphs in that book.
Right.
They focused on the most variable paragraphs. So, for example, of those 300,000 pages, between all kākā, almost all of these pages will look the same.
Right.
Because they're all kākā.
They're all birds, they're all vertebrates, they're all, there's a whole lot of stuff there in it. They've all got to somehow do oxygenate, they've got to do blood, they've got to make all the bits that are inside your body. And those things kind of quite conserved,
all of these
right?
descriptions are conserved, they all look the same.
Right.
But they do have, on every page, there'll be a paragraph somewhere where every bird is different.
Right. And that's the individual differences, just like you and me.
Exactly.
Your hair colour's, bit darker than mine.
The theory is that if what we see in nature with the North Island birds and the South Island birds was correct from a genetic perspective, then if we look at these variable paragraphs,
right,
the one North Island bird and another North Island bird should be more similar in these variable paragraphs
right,
than a North Island bird and a South Island bird.
Right.
And that doesn't seem to be the case.
But what are those variable bits actually coding for? Are they coding for eye colour or feather colour or...
We're getting there. So
okay, sorry.
The most variable bits, and that's what the study 10 years ago looked at.
Right.
We don't actually know what they do.
Right.
They are so variable because they don't code for something obvious.
Yeah, or something really important, I guess, because if it was really important, then maybe it would be conserved.
They could have an important function, but we don't know what it is. They're not genes. There are parts of the genome that are not genes.
Wow.
Just random other bits.
Just random bits.
Yes. But that study 10 years ago, because of the technological limitations, could only look at a couple of dozens of these paragraphs across the 300,000 pages.
Right.
And so you could say, okay, well, maybe they just didn't find the right paragraphs where the North Island and the South Island birds are different.
Right.
And then Denise came in and did a much more extensive study looking at the same birds again. It was 100 birds from across New Zealand.
Right.
And she looked at 100,000 paragraphs. So basically one paragraph every 3 pages.
Right.
Okay? And had exactly the same result. There was not a clear distinction between the North Island and the South Island birds. So that's when we started really puzzling, going, okay, like we've looked quite widely now, so what's going on? And so the only way to...
Can you look at the whole book?
Exactly. And that's what we're doing now.
Right.
So that was the last result we have, is essentially we now have the whole book for 10 North Island birds and 10 South Island birds.
And so a lot fewer, like 1/10 of the number, because it's a lot more...
Yeah, we need to read 1 billion letters for each of those birds.
But I'm assuming you're not doing it. You've got a computer that reads them.
Yes. We have a computer and fancy bioinformatics. In fact, we have a supercomputer to do all the comparisons. But still, it's quite costly to get that information.
Right.
And it does take some time to get that information. And I have a PhD student now, Charlotte König, who's also working in this space now. And she is now looking at the whole book, the whole genomes from these birds.
And how did you choose those 10 birds from the North Island and 10 birds from the South Island? Because I imagine there's a lot of birds, you know, even for a reasonably rare big bird, there's still quite a lot to choose from.
We had the same 100 samples that we've been working with for the last
so you didn't go out and get new samples, you used the samples that you already had?
We used the samples that we already have.
Right.
And we picked basically based on what we wanted to find out. So the most distinct ones, and then obviously from every region where kākā are still found.
Right, so all of those geographical area. And that makes sense, right? Because you're kind of getting the answer from the first kind of glance through at one paragraph or however you describe it. You're getting, they're not really different. So you take the ones that you think are the most extreme, and if you're still not getting a difference, there's just no difference.
Yeah, and that's really, really relevant for conservation, because the way you manage them is completely contrary whether they are subspecies or whether they're not.
Oh, right.
So that's
tricky, isn't it? And I guess that's tricky for, I mean, not just kākā, but for everything, for plants, for moths, for pretty much everything. If you've got something that's got a really restricted range, like much less than what it used to be, and a much smaller population that you're starting from, do you try and keep those subspecies separate, or do you say, okay, there's some diversity there, we want them to interbreed as much as possible? And what is the answer?
And that's what we're trying to find out at the moment. So there's basically 2 theories that are contradictory. Either what we see at the moment is North Island and South Island birds, there is some underlying evolutionary adaptation to these environments. The South Island birds look the way they look because they are adapting to the South Island. North Island birds look the way they look because they're adapting to the North Island. Remind me again how they look different? I haven't seen a North Island kākā. Yeah.
I'm a South Island girl, I haven't seen the North Island ones.
The South Island kākā have a lighter plumage color. They have quite a big white patch on their head.
Right.
And they're generally bigger as well. The North Island kākā a bit smaller, darker plumage color, and that white patch on their head is much smaller as well.
Right.
So it's when you look at pictures or when you go to museum, look at them, you can clearly see the difference, and they're reasonably easy to distinguish. But the question is now, is this evolutionary adaptation? In which case, you really don't want to mix them,
right?
Because then
you'll end up with them being less adaptive.
Exactly. You're diluting the adaptations. And so that would be bad. But based on the genetics and what Denise is thinking, it could also be that they're just the random leftovers from a much bigger and much more diverse population.
Right.
So those light plumage color, white head South Island ones had just happened to be the forms of kākā that survived in the South Island. And the darker coloured ones happened to be the ones that survived.
Because they got down to quite a small number. And so it just happened that one of them had a blonde patch on their head, and then just by random chance, basically, they had more offspring, just luck of the draw, they didn't happen to get killed in their nest.
And with the limited numbers now, there's also less pressure on mixing between the North Island and South Island, right? Presumably there's a bit of an inhibition to fly across the food strait, and if there's not enough pressure, then that probably doesn't happen that often, perhaps.
So you tend to choose like the closest available partner, right? You're not going on I mean, I suppose it happens with Tinder as well, doesn't it? I mean, there's that proximity thing, isn't it? I haven't used it myself, folks. I'm happily married here. But they're like, that's why they have those proximity things, right? Because, you know, as with people, birds tend to go for the closest available mate.
So that's actually
within,
a good
you know, a
comparison.
little bit.
So Kaka Tinder suggests you stick it to the North Island or the South Island, and so you maintain these differences.
Right.
But they're artifacts. They're artifacts of the population decline that was induced by people arriving,
right.
by Europeans arriving, bringing all
that
the
habitat
stoats
fragmentation and that predator pressure. Yeah,
exactly. And in that case, you're doing them a disservice if you're not mixing the populations.
Right, because that would be more diversity because you've got that hybrid vigor type thing that we all learn about in high school.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so we really need to know.
Right.
And we're hoping that now looking at entire genomes that we can actually figure it out.
And I guess it's kind of better for like if they really are just all one big population, then it is better for that population to be known to be one big population because then all of a sudden you haven't got such a small founder kind of effect because you've got more individuals, you've got more diversity, you've got more kind of...
Yeah, generally you have, as a rule in conservation, you want as much genetic diversity as you can.
Yeah.
And if you're limiting it through your management actions, you need to have a very good reason to do that.
Yeah.
And if there is none, then it's better to mix the populations. You get more diversity, and that might reflect better what they used to be.
Like, it's interesting, isn't it? But I mean, there's also that weird thing where you've got the North Island subspecies is actually sort of less critically endangered than the South Island one, because the South Island one is nationally vulnerable, but the North Island one is kind of recovering a little bit. But then I guess if you kind of, I don't know what the answer is.
Yeah, I'm wondering though if that is also partially an effect of the Wellington effect and
I do wonder that.
Yeah,
I don't know the answer to that, folks.
This is a Department of Conservation question.
I clearly didn't do enough research before this episode came to here, but
I obviously stumped as well. So,
but yeah, no, it is interesting, and I guess taxonomists kind of have this debate all the time, like, and they kind of talk about taxonomists as being splitters or lumpers. So whether you and that's always kind of a bit of a line, isn't it? Where you draw the line between subspecies and species, and I guess even sometimes if it's in a different genus or the same genus, it's kind of a little bit, how that group as a whole has been treated in the past, and kind of a bit of a judgment call, whether there's enough variation to be considered a different species or a different subspecies. And in some ways, it sort of seems like it is kind of very arbitrary. But it's interesting because when you relate that back to the conservation, it's clearly very important because that's your management strategy, and really knowing that. And I guess it happens all over New Zealand, and it must happen a lot in places like New Zealand where the populations were once bigger. Because, I mean, New Zealand used to be just mostly forested, and then with Polynesian arrival, about a third of that forest kind of left the land surface through fires and various kind of things, and moa hunting. And then with the European arrival, that whole process repeated itself, and that massive habitat loss and fragmentation and all of those introduced pests has had such a huge effect on, not just the birds, but the insects and the plants and everything. But the birds, we notice it more because they're so big and bright, and people are...
And we do see a couple of stages in the extinction there. We've had a look at that just to get a feeling for pattern of extinction. And we do indeed first see bigger birds disappear with Polynesian settlers arriving, and they're good food sources. Also, we see birds that are more found in more open areas disappearing because presumably accessibility.
Right.
And the forest birds in general, not all of them, but many forest birds seem to hang on, and small birds seem to hang on for quite a while. Yeah. But then the Europeans arrive with stoats and cats and all sorts of predators, and that's what really gets the forest birds. Then we're really then we're really losing huge diversity there.
Yeah, and of course we see that sort of refuge thing issue as well with not just the kea but also the takahe, and I imagine there's a whole bunch of insects that we don't really know their distributions well enough. We just haven't got enough people studying them and looking at the distributions, but that pattern will be the same. And what we think of sometimes as just alpine species really were much more widely spread. And of course, I guess that DNA is one of the ways that we can kind of get back to that information, shed some light on it.
It does kind of record the history of a species and a population.
It's interesting to think of ourselves, isn't it? It's like little, kind of like inside ourselves, we've got this little history of our species and our lineage there.
Yeah. It is literally like that. If there's new technology now where you can use the genome of a single individual to reconstruct the population dynamics of that individual's ancestors for thousands.
Can you do that for people as well?
Yes.
Absolutely. Have you done it for you? Have you done that, like that DNA and
what was it? 23? Have done it for people. I didn't even have to.
23andMe or something.
Yeah, no, I don't do 23andMe.
Don't do that. What should you do if you want to know?
Talk to me. I'll sequence you. No, anyway,
I would love to be sequenced. Hey, it just sounds so amazing.
So for myself, I had to do it because I'm often working with ancient DNA, and I've worked with ancient.
So that they have to know that the DNA is ancient and it's not actually yours. It's got in there.
I need to know if I sequence myself, so I kind of know my.
Wow, that's so cool. So do you know like how much percentage of Neanderthal you've got in you?
I didn't go that far. I looked at my maternal and paternal ancestry. Figured out where they're coming from.
Wow. And is it like far away or just right there?
Yeah, no, it's as you would expect in my case. Quite boring.
Well, it's interesting you say that because my husband is the same. Like his family is basically just all from the same little village, like his father's family. We did it one Christmas. It was really, really snowy and cold in Germany. And like basically we could do his family tree like hundreds of years back from the local cemetery. And it's quite amazing because like my family's completely the opposite. Like I'm here in Dunedin, but my great-great-grandfather came from the Shetlands, and then my grandmother's side is sort of Welsh and French, and there's a bit of Romney, what they used to call gypsy, and some English and some lowland Scottish. It's just a mixture of everything there. But yeah, it's interesting. I would love to do my genome. I'll talk to Michael after this and see if he can get my sequence into one of his little things. Sorry.
We're
diverting onto humans.
Exactly.
Go back to the kākā.
But what you can do with humans as well as with those birds is you can actually look into, from a single genome, you can reconstruct the last 200,000 years or so of population history of that population.
So like the ups and downs, the bottlenecks, exactly. When they had a big explosion of the population, when it was... That is amazing that you can get that from one individual.
Yeah, we can see that. And for kākā, it is actually quite interesting to do that because we do see, when we compare them to kea as well, that kākā did have a couple of bottlenecks throughout the ice ages, for example.
Right.
But they always seem to expand as soon as the conditions are good.
Right. So there's sort of a little bit of boom and bust going on there, but maybe their population, like that particular species, is okay with that boom and bust because they've obviously made it through several iterations of that over time.
Perhaps they are, and perhaps that's why we see it now again happening as soon as predators are controlled. So they seem to be extremely adaptable. It's just they can't deal with the predators.
Yeah. It's interesting, isn't it? Because there's species all through history, like the passenger pigeon is the classic one. They were just thousands and thousands and thousands of them, but it was that classic example, at least it was when I was at uni, of a species that had to be super common in order to exist. And that was its style, and it just could not handle that massive whack to its population. Anyway, I have one more part to this interview that I would like to get through. And of course, you've got the DNA, but I wondered, there's a bit of information because we're talking about kind of the post-European arrival, and that must have been a huge collapse. But we have some information from that period, I imagine, from museum specimens. And then prior to that, the Polynesian arrival and right through. We've got some oral history, and I wondered if you could just talk us through what maybe some of that, how that evidence can kind of either back up or talk to that DNA evidence from that Mataranga Māori or those museum kind of, there's still feathers in existence.
It's something we're really, really interested in. These are obviously the stories that belong to tangata whenua, and we can only listen if they're... but essentially what we're very interested in is there must be stories about diversity of kākā across New Zealand, with feathers being so important.
And I imagine that the Kaka feathers, I mean, there are those really bright ones, so I imagine that they were quite prized for different things.
I would imagine so, and because of that, I think there's bound to be oral histories that talk about diversity of kākā, and, you know, that alone would help. If you're looking at the European records, you go back less than 200 years.
Yeah, which is nothing in terms of DNA.
Nothing, right?
Because what did you say before? 2 million years is nothing in terms of DNA. So
exactly.
200 years is like less than nothing. It's a blink of an eye.
So if we at least understood how the diversity is shaped from when people first arrived here, and whether there was, prior to European arrival, a much bigger diversity of different types of kākā around. I mean, even the first Europeans still described that. So Buller, I think, has 10 different variations of kākā in his book.
That's based on geography. So
that's
kind of
not just geography, but plumage color and variation.
Right.
There's also.
But was he matching the plumage color to different areas, or is he just saying in this one area there's?
Not that I'm aware of. And so in fact, there is. I've been to Te Papa. I looked at a couple of samples there, and there are actually samples that look like North Island kākā that were collected by Buller on the west coast of the South Island. So there was more variation.
Right.
There was a wider spread of these different phenotypes.
And like lower down, like not right up in Tasman, Nelson there. So that kind of gives a little bit more credence to your theory that they actually were more mixed at the time.
Yes, and I would suspect, the real answer will lie in oral traditions and oral histories. And so, I would be very interested to hear if anyone knows any sort of stories about kākā and diversity in kākā feather colours and all of that across New Zealand.
Yeah, no. And, I mean, I guess there are, because there was that whole time where there were bounties on kea, and I don't think there were bounties on kākā, but I wonder if the same sort of... Have you done the genetics of the kea? Have you looked at that, whether that same sort of variation has kind of reduced or...
So I haven't got the kea population variation in my head. Their entire population history is very different in that they don't seem to have gone through these boom and bust periods, but they seem to sort of stay at a very constant and relatively small population size compared to kākā.
Right.
We're not sure why that is and whether that just means, they're...
It might just be because there was more bush, right? And kākā are more bush-like.
It's entirely that. Could it entirely be that? So that's the population size question. The stability of the population, you could interpret in two different ways. Either they're not so much affected by environmental factors, or their populations, and that's why that stays constant. Yeah. Or they're more affected, and that's why they stay low.
Low, right? No, it's a bit of a catch-22, isn't it?
Yeah.
Oh, craziness. And have you had anything to do with the kakapo? Because of course that's the next step out. No?
I had very.
But the genomes of that are really well known because there's so few of them. So the whole DNA for the kakapo is. Yeah.
There was a very interesting study led by Dr. Nick Dussex. I made a very, very small contribution to that, not really worth a mention. But that's looking into kakapo diversity and also going back in time.
Right, because of course that's heavily managed population. So the genetics are really crucial because otherwise you're really kind of going down bottlenecks and inbreeding, and you sort of, when you've got to that level of scarcity, then you really are managing the population quite a lot. And I guess the hope is always that we get to a point where there are enough birds that high level of management doesn't need to be there anymore.
Yeah. And for kakapo, that's of course challenging for a bird that is flightless
in
an environment where there are predators that
Yeah.
will go after you if you're breeding on the ground. And
We just got to get rid of all those predators. Really just have to get rid of those predators. It's the only answer. It's the only solution.
it does seem to be that way, yes.
Unfortunately, but still, it is the answer. Yeah, so now I have got this conservation, the conservation. That's not what it's called. It's called the conversation. Sorry. Oh, my goodness. What is the matter with me today? It's called The Conversation. And it's an Australian, New Zealand type news outlet. It is free. You don't have to pay for it. You can make a donation to help with it. And this is a fantastic article that you've got in here. And I just wanted to highlight this. I will put the link in the episode description. But I just wanted to highlight this because it's got two things that I really like. It's got a really nice kind of succinct layman's kind of, it's not super complicated to understand article, but it does have the references and it does have links in it, so you can go back to the other sources in it. And what I really like about the conversation is that it's gone outside of Australia now, so they are actually linked to New Zealand-based scientists, not just scientists. There's humanities, politics, all sorts of things in there.
Yes. Yeah, and they're a really great outlet for science communication. You'll find a lot of articles there that simplify, that summarize scientific articles.
Yeah.
Scientific articles often have to be written in a very specific way to make them reproducible and to emphasize very specific things, which makes them a bit
kind
less
of difficult
accessible.
as an entry point into the subject, I
exactly.
think. And I think that's where I see this as being a really great entry point into the subject. So you kind of get a little bit of the detail of the most recent finding, but also the background and the kind of the broad picture. This is where we are at the moment, folks, and this is our study that we've just done, and this is how this contributes to that.
It is a very important outlet. We are publicly funded in the end, and we have an obligation.
We, as in scientists.
Scientists at the uni, and there is an obligation that we communicate what we find to the people that fund it.
Yeah.
And scientific papers themselves are often not the best or the easiest way to communicate.
And I think sometimes if you haven't got that training in and that experience in reading them, you can often kind of just go down the rabbit hole and get things completely around the wrong way. And that's not because I want to be gatekeeping, but because there is a skill to that, right? And there's a whole lot of background and in the field and all that context that sometimes is taken for granted, that you'll know how all these things fit together. And, sometimes words are used in slightly different meanings in different fields and all that. But yeah, I did just want to highlight the conversation there. They are freely available, the conversation. It's on, you can just click on the whatever, there's a follow thing, you can get a newsletter or you can do it through Facebook or however people do things. I'm sure they're all there. Anyway, thank you very much for contributing to that, because, I don't know how that leads into the stats or where people find that, but it is something that you see more and more of, I think, and that's great. And of course the Science Media Centre as well, which also do humanities as well as science, but they have great summaries of things that are coming out, and that's also publicly available
the
there.
Science Media Centre will usually reach out to scientists when new studies come out to get comments on these studies, and that's a good way for sort of keeping up to date with scientific developments.
Yeah, and I think one of the good things about this is that it's not a journalist summarising the complicated science paper. It's the scientists themselves summarising it in a way that's easily digestible for the public. And that means that the main points, the main message, the main findings aren't kind of going through that Chinese whispers type system. Yeah. So, I think
it is actually quite a lot of fun to write these conversation articles, because with scientific papers, there's a whole set of rules. They fit into a specific
you
scheme,
have like the introduction, the methods, all the way through.
And for the conversation, the main thing is that you communicate clearly what you found.
Yeah. So succinctly, what is it that you found?
What we found so far is that up to 100,000 markers, we don't know the answer to whether there's what drives the differences between North Island and South Island. And that is why we're now looking at whole genomes to finally, hopefully understand what's driving differences between North Island and South Island kākā and how to manage them based on that.
So once you've done this final whole genome, you will know the answer one way or the other.
Yes, if there's absolutely still no difference, no clear difference, well, first of all, then we'll be puzzled because something's got to be different.
Something's got to be different, right? You would expect because you can see the difference, right?
Yeah. But yes, I would say that by the time we've analyzed these genomes, we will know what is driving the differences, and that will then hopefully be sort of clear information and how to manage them going forward.
Right. And then presumably you then work with conservation ecologists and conservationists like, for instance, Elton and Tangata Whenua there.
With Department of Conservation does do a lot of translocations. There's Project Jansen, who's working in the Abel Tasman region. And so those are the people that need this data to make their decisions, basically. Right. We can only provide the genetic data. The translocation experts can then look at it and say, okay, clearly based on this is what we need to do in terms of translocations. But we can make the recommendations based on genetic data.
Yeah, it's amazing, eh? Now, you mentioned briefly your work with ancient DNA there. Can you get DNA from like feathers that are on cloaks or museum specimens of birds? Can you get some of the diversity data out of that and kind of like, he's nodding, folks, he's nodding.
Yes, I'm nodding. We have done that. So this was part of what Denise did for her PhD, Denise Martini. She looked at museum samples, so that's bone samples, but also at feather samples, at toe pads from museum samples. So basically quite a large range.
So what was that last one? Toe pads?
Toe pads.
Like the pads on the bottom of your feet?
Yes, exactly.
Wow.
You kind of cut them off with a scalpel and then you digest them and get DNA out of them.
Right.
Basically in the ancient data, there's no difference to the modern data. There is no clear separation between North Island and South Island birds.
Right.
There is quite a significant amount of genetic variation. There was, and there still is. So they haven't actually been bottlenecked genetically.
Right.
And
that's good for the population,
it's
right?
It's excellent for the population. It's not super surprising because the bottleneck would have been short in genetic terms again.
Right, yeah.
And so you have persistence of multiple lineages. Each individual carries 2 lineages, right? So,
right.
But still, again, we don't see a clear separation between North Island and South Island. We don't see changes.
What about the Norfolk and the Chatham Island subspecies? Have you done work on them?
I haven't. I have a feeling that my colleague, Associate Professor Nick Rowlands, has been working on them. But I don't know much about them at the moment.
Okay. So I was just wondering if we know that they're definitely different species or if maybe they were just subspecies that happened to be on islands and therefore became...
I have a feeling there is some information on that, but I don't have it in my head.
Yeah. To be fair, for conservation purposes, it probably doesn't matter because they're now extinct.
They are,
what I was wondering is, and this is just really quick because we've only got a couple of minutes left, but there's a lot of talk about de-extinction and kind of bringing things back from the past. But on a much smaller level, would it be possible to bring back some of the diversity of a species that still exists, like the kākā or the kia or the kakapo even?
I think that is one of the key strengths of these new technologies that are currently being developed by, for example, Colossal, the de-extinction company, where I think once they've finished their development or get further with it, they will be able to use this technology to reintroduce diversity that we see in the past, but that isn't there anymore, back into the population. And that is I think one of the key arguments, in favor of these de-extinction developments.
And I guess, of course, people get excited about the thylacine and the mammoth and the moa, but if that's what takes. I don't know. So I'm torn on the thing. I haven't got a clear one way or the other. But some part of me thinks if that's what it takes to get these big funders enthused about it, and then we can get the technology and the advances that we need to help present-day conservation of species which are still there, but maybe have just been really bottlenecked in the diversity that we see, but we know they used to be more diverse, then maybe I can see some sort of crazy argument for it. I mean, you can't dictate. I mean, don't get me wrong, folks. I would love to be able to dictate what rich people spend their money on, because it wouldn't be, spaceships and random crazy that they do. But no, it's been absolutely fantastic to have you on the show, Michael, and thank you very much for coming. We will undoubtedly tap you on the shoulder at some later date and get you back on. Folks out there, if you have enjoyed this episode as much as I have, which I'm sure you all have because it's with one of my favourite people and about one of my favourite birds, there are a couple of other episodes that we have mentioned. That one with Elton Smith was fantastic. It's absolutely worth a listen. And also, of course, the one with Nick Rawlins. We talked about those Murgassa duck, the toothed ducks, crazy. And we had a previous one with Michael there. Oh, that was a couple of years ago now, wasn't it? I'm even forgetting what it was about. What we talked about Neanderthal, didn't we?
I think it was the origin of New Zealand birds.
Oh, yes, it was too. Yeah, it was more about birds. We have to get you on to talk about that ancient human stuff at some point. I know you really care about birds now, but yeah, it would be quite cool though. Anyway, thank you very much, folks, and I will just hit the outro, and you can, if I find the right mouse, enjoy the sunny day.
You've been listening to the OI podcast, the shout out for the arts, sciences and Mataranga Māori.
You can support this podcast by becoming a member of the OI. Check out the Otago Institute for Arts and Sciences on Facebook or our website.
If you'd like to listen again to this episode or others from the series, look for the OI podcast on ORFM's website, oar.org.nz.
Brought to you by the Otago Institute for Arts and Sciences, the Otago branch of the Royal Society of New Zealand.
This podcast was produced by ORFM Dunedin with support from New Zealand On the Air.